I think the caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly is the most beautiful analogy for a human being going from the person we thought we were supposed to be to become the person we were meant to be. If there's something innate within you that you're not expressing into the world, it eventually catches up with you.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis. This is Chip Conley. And what is your essential truth? At the core of who you are and why you are here on this planet, how would you answer that question? For a lot of us, it's a question we sort of run away from because it sounds a little too abstract. And maybe the life we've created is too far afield from the essential truth. Well, today's guest, Katherine, also known as Katherine Dudtschak, had an enormous gap. She was the straight-laced banker when she was a he, with 4 kids and a wife. She was running a company, running a division of the largest bank of Canada with 25,000 people reporting into her divisions. And she had to tell her truth. And her truth ultimately was to reaffirm and to affirm her gender truth, which was that she was a woman, even though she presented as a man. And that's what our story is about today. Our story is Katie's story of how she went from being somebody who was straight-laced banker, very successful from her farm boy roots to actually coming out in a very public way. And most recently being on the cover of the business section of the Saturday Toronto Star paper. And her story is gaining a lot of attraction out there, and we are very honored that she joined us, as popular as she is, because she's an MEA alum as well. So I hope you enjoy this, and you'll hear my own observations on this episode at the end of the episode. Katherine Dudtschak, thank you for being here on the Midlife Chrysalis. I'm going to call you Katie instead of Katherine, even though the name of your new book is Sincerely Katherine.
You got it.
So good to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chip.
Let's dive in because you have a full story. In the intro, I told people a little bit about your story and the fact that you were one of the most acclaimed and best known business leaders in Canada, especially in the banking world. And yet there was something inside you that said, you're not complete, even though you were very successful. So this is sort of a classic case, although in your case, not so classic because a lot of people don't choose to change their gender. But for a lot of people in midlife, they do feel like something's missing. Something's not quite right. I'm living someone else's script. Can you give us a little bit of your background with respect to how you felt that way?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chip. And before I do, just great to see you. And it's beautiful how the universe has brought you and I into each other's lives and through common people we know. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to know you. And I applaud you. We'll talk about it. I applaud you for what you're doing through Modern Elder Academy and through this podcast. It's beautiful. So I think the caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly is the most beautiful analogy for a human being going from the person we thought we were supposed to be to become the person we were meant to be. And I just happen to have a more graphic or more visible version of that story. Yet at the same time, I know that most human beings go through some form of an awakening, crisis or awakening at some point in their life. So for me, as I cover in my book, Sincerely Katherine, I had successfully come out of childhood, out of teenage years, going, okay, I'm clear on the fact that my parents had intergenerational trauma and they brought it to our home. I'm clear the fact that, I struggled in school. And as much as every report card said, in my former name, if Katie only applied herself, she could do so much better. I knew I wasn't dumb. I knew I didn't lack ability. And as I talk about in my book, I've never been formally diagnosed, but I'm pretty certain I'm dyslexic. So I knew those things in childhood, and I came out of my teenage years going, I am going to prove to my parents that I can build a better life. I'm going to prove to my teachers that I'm not dumb. And like most type A's in the corporate world, you go on this journey to prove to others that you're good enough. And it worked. I married an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary woman. We had 4 extraordinary children. I took every job that was offered to me, no matter where it was geographically, and I was dead and determined that I was going to prove to the world that I was capable. And it worked. And, the whole while, I didn't know even what gender meant. And just to be clear, I don't care for the word transgender because I didn't transition my gender. I affirmed my gender, and gender is simply defined as feminine and masculine characteristics that make up the human being. Men, women, everybody in between has a combination of feminine or masculine traits that define who we are. And if you're a bit spiritual, one could argue that those traits actually come from your essence or your soul. I certainly feel that way in terms of my own journey. So, you can run, but you can't hide. If there's something innate within you that, you're not expressing into the world, it eventually catches up with you. Whether it catches up in the form of mental health or disease, or, you have a midlife awakening, it catches up with you. And for me, it all started to come to the head around age 45.
It's a classic midlife age. Okay. Uh-huh.
It sure is. And, the reality is it was never gone. Again, in my book, I talk about going to play in the sandbox with tractors, with my sister's undergarments underneath. I have very vivid memories of childhood wanting to express myself, my feminine side, into the world. Yet you learn by the system, the societal system, whether it's religion, family norms, social norms, what to do and not to do. And I learned as early as 5, 10 years old that you don't do that.
And your family, tell us about your family. I mean, were you in a rural family?
I grew up on a very humble farm.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, and ironically, it was a mink farm. So I also grew up with with this shame of being on a mink farm, feeding the fur industry. And it started from a noble place a couple of hundred years ago or several hundred years ago. But so I grew up on a farm and, very humble beginnings. My parents survived the Second World War. 3 of my grandparents died during the war. My grandmother was deeply injured during the war, during an air raid when she was trying to flee to Sweden or Denmark. My mother became a child refugee at 8 years old. My father became a Russian prisoner of war at about 14 years old. My mother grew up in what is now northern Poland. My father grew up what is now northern Chechnya or the Czech Republic. So my mother is Prussian and Baltic by roots. My father is Bohemian by roots. And, my mother was a child refugee. My dad was a Russian prisoner of war for 3 years, waking up with people dead beside him every day. And so they brought that trauma to our humble farm in rural Canada. And because they wanted a better life, like any newcomer does. And it's funny, I was doing a talk in Sweden, not in Sweden, in Norway. And for the first time in my life, I said I had 3 sisters. And I caught myself because I actually only ever talked about 2. And before I was born, I had a sister, Sandra, that passed away. I always wondered if I was her reincarnated because I felt feminine on the inside and I didn't think I fit in the world. And I go, maybe my body was built wrong or something. So I grew up with an older sister, Mona, and a younger sister, Becky, who are just such beautiful human beings, and we love each other deeply. Both of my parents died before I came out. And, as I started to say earlier, Chip, at around 45, the gender noise got noisier. And what happened?
How many years ago is that, Katie?
So I just turned 60. This chick is 60.
Yeah, looking good. You're looking good.
You can say that. You can say that.
Quite a cougar. I don't know.
I don't know. Can you call women cougars at Modern Elder Academy?
As long as you call men something similarly, like
something I like
a leopard, yes, and a cougar, and yeah, no. Listen, a cougar can be a very, depending upon how people take it. It is a name that's been even used by women's workshops here at MEA. They call their name, the cohort, the Cougar Collection.
Well, I take it as a compliment, Chip.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm happy to be a cougar in your book. So
yeah.
So it was about 45, and I'm going to try to tell the story now in a way that everyone in the audience can feel into their own journey to truth, their own journey to wholeness. When your kids start getting older and don't need you as much, and your marriage matures, and your job becomes so intuitive that you don't need to work 18-hour days or 14-hour days, your nervous system and your subconscious have time to breathe. And so if there's something that you've been suppressing within you, in my case, it was gender, but it could be your creative ability. It could be emotion. It could be
a spiritual curiosity.
Exactly. Those things get louder and louder as you approach midlife. And so for me, it was in my early to mid 40s. And by the time I got to be 50, it got really loud. And what happened, there's things that awaken us at midlife as well. So in my case, I had just I had just finished leading as a CEO a restructuring of a bank in 19 countries in the Caribbean. I'm a systems thinker. I'm deeply curious. I think big picture. I'm always solving problems. It's part of being dyslexic. And I had come out of the Caribbean with my soul somewhat crushed. We had restructured the bank in 24 months, had turned it around, was starting to deliver record performance after the financial crisis. And 40% of the workforce was let go or we parted ways with because we had sold countries, some of the 19 countries. And what I had witnessed was the short-sightedness of the political system and the short-sightedness of CEOs that build value, shareholder value, putting on assets onto the balance sheet of a bank and getting it ready to sell. And here I was after a financial crisis, leading a restructuring, firing people, and my heart was broken. And I go, I thought all the answers were at the top of business. I set my whole life that I was going to become a CEO and get enlightened and all the answers. And here I was, emotionally crushed after that job. And, I was heartbroken. And so it really forced me into myself to say, that dream wasn't the dream that I thought I set out to achieve, 25 years ago. Something's wrong here. And so I became very introspective. And by the time I was 50, for the first time in my career, I took a job that I knew intuitively would be easy. I had up to
This was
that,
at
our,
Royal Bank of
yeah,
Royal Bank of
Canada's
Scotland.
largest bank. And
Yeah.
I
And
took,
you were EVP. You grew to executive vice president. I mean, you were like one of the top people in the largest bank in Canada.
yeah, I was. And they offered me a couple of different jobs. And for the first time in my career, I took the job that I knew that I could do intuitively. And it was a job where I could be empathic, leading people. And the CEO at the time said, "You're going to do great at this job." And it was intuitive, and I had time. And I had time to be with myself for the first time in my life. And the gender secret got louder and louder. And then my mother died. And it's amazing what we suppress to keep our parents happy or proud of us, even at 50 or 55 years old. And my mother died, and I started seeing articles in National Geographic about gender. And it got to the point that one day I booked a lunch with a colleague who's an expert on all things LGBT, and I said, "Who the heck is Caitlyn Jenner? And what the heck is transgender?" I was leading the most sheltered banker life you could imagine, and so intently focused on being this high-performing executive and perfect family. And in that lunch, my colleague said, "No, Caitlyn felt female on the inside her whole life." And I said, "Yeah, but how the heck can Caitlyn be Caitlyn now and still be attracted to women?" And he goes, Katie, in my old name, he goes, "Who you go to sleep as is different than who you go to sleep with. Caitlyn was wired female on the inside her entire life. Who she goes to sleep with is a woman. She's a lesbian." And at that moment, you could have pushed me over with a feather. And for the first time in my life, I go, "Oh my God." And my colleague went on to explain that she poured herself into sports and into her career to try to prove to the world that she could, pardon the words, but be man enough. And that moment was August 25th, 2017, at around 12:35 noon, and it changed my life. It changed my life. I immediately became a zombie. And if you're the least bit spiritually curious on this, my deceased sister Sandra was born on August the 25th, 1963. And whether I'm her soul reincarnated, who knows? But it certainly makes me shiver every time I think it. And from that moment, Chip, I began what has now been a decade-long journey to my essence, to my soul. And it's why I described earlier that we all have feminine and masculine characteristics within us. My feminine characteristics were more extreme than the average. And it meant taking more dramatic steps to find inner peace and to live comfortably in this binary world that we live in. But I went on a decade-long journey, and by the time a year later, in the fall of 2018, I was suicidal and I was ready to take my life, which is very common in the transgender community and in the LGBT community in general. I can assure every person listening to this that my gender or sexual orientation has nothing to do with mental health issues. The mental health issues were all a result of being deathly afraid of being homeless and being rejected by the world, and deathly afraid of hurting my children and my spouse and my loved ones. And I had convinced myself a year in that the better path was for my life to be over, because it was a perfect life based on materialistic terms and based on the life that I set out to build at 18 or 19 years old. And it was a dear friend of mine who's a psychiatric nurse that become part of my inner circle. And her name's Leanne. And Leanne heard me say, if my life was over today, it had been a perfect life. And she goes, Katie, would you like me to send you the research on intergenerational trauma caused by suicide? Because I thought it would have been better for everybody, including me, if life was over. And in that moment, she stopped me dead in my tracks, and I said, okay, well, my plan's flawed. And it was in that moment that I wrote a letter of intention to myself to acknowledge my gender diversity and commit to a path to face my truth and to come out in my job leading 25,000 people in a company of 80,000 people, which ultimately happened on June 17th, 2019. And a couple of things that are important to note. Like, I didn't come out in that job to be a hero. The CEO, when I came out to the CEO in February of that year, he goes, "Oh my God, you're going to be a hero." I'm bawling my eyes out in his office. And I go, this isn't about that. I'm on a path to try to find inner peace. And the thought of giving up my job and, everything that I had built, would definitely push me over the edge from a mental health perspective. And it would put my children and my spouse at risk. So I didn't give the company an option. I chose to come out in my job in front of 80,000 people in order, with the utmost humility. Brene Brown could write the same book on vulnerability. And I chose to come out on video publicly and bare my soul to 80,000 people in hopes that they would give me a chance to reprove that I could be as good or better than ever as their leader. And they gave me that chance up until that day.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. Katie, what does it mean at that point in June of 2019 to come out? How were you dressed? You had not transitioned at that point?
So I hadn't affirmed my gender. I was starting to take hormones, and I had done some. My hair was getting longer, and I was living in a man's world when I came out. And on the video, I bared my soul, talked about my life story, talked about my secret, humbly in a recording studio. And there was a host like you, Chip, kind, loving, empathic, asking me questions. We recorded 5 hours of video to create a 7-minute video for 80,000 people. And at one point I said, I'd like you to introduce you to Katherine. And I put up a photo of myself. I had been to New York. I had spent time with a woman who is an amazing human being, Monica Prada. And she helped me see myself in the mirror for the first time. That's the other thing that puzzles people. They go, you're affirming your gender. You must have worn women's clothing your whole life. I know, none of that. None of that. I felt that I was wired female on the inside. I loved pretty things. I was sensitive. I was creative. I was affectionate. I knew all those things. I had a longing, but I'd never seen myself fully in the mirror as you see me today. And so I went to New York City on my birthday of 2019 to meet with her. I'd put off seeing her for a year because I knew intuitively that's the thing about consciousness and our essence. You know it. If you're true to it and you meditate on it and you sit with it, you might have become a lawyer, but deep down you knew that you frickin' wanted to be a poet or a musician your whole life, and you just knew it, and you knew you had denied it. Well, I was the same. And so I went to see Monica, and she helped me get some hair, and she helped me. This is my hair, by the way. And we did some makeup, and I saw myself in the mirror for the first time on my birthday, my biological birthday, in March of 2019. So I held up the photo of that moment to 80,000 people, and I said, I'm going to work remote for a couple of months, and in September of 2019, I'll be back to the office, and I will go by she and her pronouns, and my name will be Katherine, but you can call me Katie because we're family. And I said to them all, I ask you to reach out to me. If you've got questions, I'm happy to talk to you about it. And just know my family is good, and know how much I love and appreciate all of you. And don't be shy. Don't be shy. And then the video was done. A couple days later, I went to in my day job, I went to a leadership meeting with 500 or 600 leaders in the room, part of my team. There was about 5,000 leaders on my team. And it was my first time in front of my team in the company 2 days later, and I was presenting as a male. And there was security. We had security outside of my house because we didn't know what would happen. And I walked into this room, and 600 eyes, the meeting was carrying on, and 600 eyes turned to me. And I was so nervous. And my colleague, one of my old team members, was an incredible, eloquent speaker, beautiful human being. He started introducing me. And they didn't let him introduce me. And they all stood up and they started applauding. And I started walking from the back of this auditorium at this conference to the front. And everybody kept standing in the way and hugging me. And eventually, after about 15 minutes, I get to the stage. And, and all I could say was, ta-da! And I said, surprise. And we talked for about 5 minutes about just how much I love and appreciated everybody and for their kindness. And I asked them for their patience. And then we got back to work, and we talked about business strategy and business performance, and we got back to work. And a week later, I went and worked remote for a couple of months while I bought a new wardrobe and had a little bit of surgery, and I returned to the office on September the 6th, 2019 as Katherine. And the opposite happened.
The opposite happened in terms of, people were not respectful at that point.
No, they were. The reality was I expected to be homeless.
Okay, got it.
And so I received the greatest outpouring of love and support.
Now, that's not always the case for people, though. What advice would you give to someone, not necessarily someone who is going to
affirm their gender,
but someone who's going to be doing something that's sort of like major, that may be against the standard demographic? What would you recommend? Because my sense is that you're a confident human, and you're somebody who had built an emotional bank account with those 25,000 people who were reporting into your divisions of the bank. And you had built a rapport such that people could see your humanity. So that all helped you. And you're also in Canada, which is a pretty liberal-minded place.
California's pretty good.
California's not bad either. Yes, true.
Or most of it.
What advice would you give?
And I had led multiple corporate transformations. And I had found many years earlier that there was strength in vulnerability. There was strength in being willing to cry with your employees when they're worried about losing their jobs. The restructuring in the Caribbean, I would cry with 6,000 employees because they'd want to know how many jobs were going to be eliminated, and I could feel their fear of losing their job and hurting their livelihood and their family. And so I used to cry with them, because that's my genuine emotion. I learned to let emotion out. And that's the vulnerability part, is I had learned earlier as a leader that Brene Brown calls vulnerability a superpower, and yes, it is, but let's talk about superpowers not in an egoic sense. Its vulnerability is a gift because it is the rawest form of authenticity when it genuinely comes from your heart. And so allowing yourself to be emotional about your journey and vulnerable about your journey to yourself and to your family and to your friends and to your colleagues is number one. Number two is community. It is, you start small and you bring people into what you know about yourself slowly and thoughtfully. Maybe not so slowly, but certainly thoughtfully. And you don't necessarily, it could be religion. You could be the stiff lawyer that's always wanted to perform on Broadway or, sing or do whatever, and you build a group of friends in the law community that are all really stiff. Not bad, but they're just very formal human beings. You probably don't go to one of them as the first people to bring into your community. You find friends or family or new people that share your journey, that can empathize with what you're going through. I talked about Leanne. Apart from my former spouse, I told her about my gender truth, or what I felt was going to be my gender truth, 10 days after that lunch. I felt so much shame and guilt that I thought I'd betrayed her. I didn't know, but I felt so guilty. And so I told her first. And then I told, another family member that I sensed would be loving and kind. And then the first person outside of that immediate core that I told was Leanne. Leanne was a psychiatric nurse on the streets of, a pretty rough part of town. And she had talked about people that were homeless from the LGBT community. And she had talked about a colleague that was transgender at one point. And I just felt that Leanne would be understanding and supportive. And one of my besties of all time, Mike, was her husband. We went to business school together, and, we have a soul connection, Mike and I. And I knew that I needed her on board in order to help Mike be on board. So starting with bringing the right people into your inner circle and then growing it slowly so that you've got the right emotional support around you and then growing that community thoughtfully over time, I think is really important. The other thing that I would also say, Chip, about community, it's really important that you surround yourself with mental health support if you are struggling with mental health issues and anxiety over, this confession that you're essentially making to yourself and going to make to the world. I was the stiff banker and naive I thought that I needed to find a PhD in psychology, and their tile had to say gender on it. And it took me 2 or 3 tries to find a psychologist that was empathic enough that I could truly open up to her. And because the first couple of psychologists were traditionally trained psychologists, where they sit on the other side of the room, you lay on the sofa and you just talk and bare your soul. And they were so reserved that I could never get to trust with them. And so surrounding yourself with the right professional support and finding the right ones where you can truly find calm and peace was, also really important in building community. And then the third is time. Like, I spent a year reconciling this part of my identity, my part of my soul and my essence to be true. And then I was at the worst of mental health. The therapist I was working with was hard ass. The most challenging, hard ass gender therapist probably on the planet. There's a whole backstory on the person. And I picked them to prove or disprove my gender truth. And we worked together for 2 months, and they put me through a battery of tests. And at the end of the battery of the tests, they said, your gender dysphoria, which is the medical term for the disconnect between your inner and outer self. Your gender dysphoria is at the severe level, and your mental health, your anxiety is at the 97th percentile. And so I went through a year of that, and I wouldn't recommend that taking a year to anybody. And then I went through another year of planning my coming out to my family, to my friends, to my trip to New York, to colleagues. And so I chose a journey that involved a critical path, a restructuring plan that played out over time so that I could bring my children, my spouse, my friends, my leadership team, 25,000 people on the journey with me. It was the time part was the most exhausting part. And by that point, the community also became exhausting because I wasn't just living my own coming out. I was carrying the hearts and minds and the souls of others with me, which is part of my soul's journey. I've done enough spiritual work to know that this fear of rejecting others, hurting others, being rejected and judged were part of my healing journey. And, for me, it played out over 2 years.
What kind of path are you carving through midlife? Our free Midlife Pathfinder quiz helps you discover which of 8 archetypes best describe your approach to this stage of life and what that means for your next chapter. It only takes a few minutes, and your results may surprise you. Find out your archetype now. It's quick, it's fun, and it might help you see your journey in a whole new light. Take the Pathfinder quiz at meawisdom.com/quiz. Thank you. I want to move forward because you stayed with the bank for a period of time, and then you were recruited to go be CEO of Home Equity Bank of Canada. And so here you are, someone who has found her gender, or basically, been able to live her truth of her gender. And now you're going to be the CEO of a moderately sized bank in Canada. What was that like?
A couple important points leading up to that CEO. So it's not uncommon when you claim back parts of your soul and your essence that things change. So in my case, I still have all the same friends I had before I came out. My children and I have never been closer. My former spouse and I are dear friends. And I have a whole lot of new friends that are eclectic, eccentric, artistic,
Non-bankers,
creative,
non-bankers.
non-bankers. Like I have the most beautiful life today because of the people that have come into my life. Yet part of me knew I was carrying a backstory at my old company. They were probably carrying a backstory about me. But the most important part was I needed to prove to myself that I could get another job as Katherine, as my whole self. And I will say this publicly, I have had lots of women say it, and I think probably many, if not all women, think it. Did you get to be a CEO because you started in a man's world? And probably. Had I been this creative, expressive, feminine, talkative, emotive soul, early in my banking career, I probably would have gone and been an artist, not a banker. But I probably wouldn't have got to be CEO. But who knows? However, I did. I can't change who I am. Yet, deep down, I wanted a new beginning. I wanted a new beginning where I could take on a job, a role as a leader. As I said at the time, and I say at the end of my first book, because book 2 and 3 are underway, my first book, I say it at the end.
And your first book is Sincerely Katherine.
Right. I said at the end that, I feel called to be free and me in the world. I feel called to bring all of my life, leadership, and business experience to be of service to humanity and the world. My coming out, Chip, and everyone, opened my frickin' heart to humanity and the human condition in a way that I could have never, ever imagined. Countless human beings opened up to me about their hurt and hardship stories because they felt safe with me because I was vulnerable with them. And I felt I needed a new beginning where I could bring all of Katie and Katherine to another opportunity and to be chosen. And so, yes, I left. I spent several months grieving and healing, and it led me on quite an extraordinary healing journey and spiritual journey. It helped me find a level of inner peace with self. My first book is really about becoming Katherine. My second book will really be about being Katherine and my healing journey. And it led me to be the CEO of Home Equity Bank, where I was recruited by the board to lead a bank caring for aging people, Modern Elder Academy. And it felt so right. It felt so right, Chip. And I'm going to interview you on my podcast, and we're going to talk about what brought you to Modern Elder Academy. Because as I moved through my coming out journey, and I had all these people telling me their stories, and then I took a period of time off to grieve and to heal, and I started following Michael Singer and reading his books, Untethered Soul and Living Untethered, and I started to meditate, and I go, oh my God, there's so much human potential available to humanity in this world if we could only create a world where every human being could express themselves fully. And I was then 56 by then, and I'm going, and oh my God, this midlife thing sucks, because I had given up one job.
You should have come to MEA. You should have come to MEA.
I did.
No, that's right, you did. Oh, that's right.
And I went to MEA as part of this healing journey.
Exactly.
And I'm going, oh my goodness, the single largest cohort of humanity that is struggling in the Western world with their sense of worth and identity and purpose and mission are people over the age of 50. And I go, oh my God, and here I have an opportunity to be the CEO of a bank serving aging people. And the whole mission of the company, as we reset the strategy while I was there, I'm no longer there, while I was there, was to help bring into aging people's lives a sense of dignity and a sense of independence and a sense of empowerment in their aging years, which I know are all things that you believe. And so, I was a CEO of a bank in the Caribbean. I got to be executive vice president, leading 25,000 people. And then I got to be the CEO of a bank serving aging people. Like, how lucky was I?
So I have two last questions for you. The first one relates to your transition from that role to Sincerely Catherine and the company that you've just started, the book you've just come out. What if there's a basic premise or headline that sort of speaks to the Catherine point of view that you're sharing with the world? What is that?
The company is called Sincerely. It's a storytelling, learning, and research company. The term I use, think story as sermon. That's why you run this podcast, Chip. You don't need a preacher to tell you the answer. Through heart-centered, through vulnerable, honest stories of the human journey to wholeness, to service to others, answers, the messages, the insights, the lessons, the inspiration automatically emerge from within the human, from your soul, from consciousness. They emerge. So Sincerely, the mission of Sincerely is to use story and human stories of service to humanity and the world, human stories that involved hardship and awakening to your wholeness, and then emergence that brings you to finding your gifts, your essence, and what those gifts are, and how you're going to bring them to others as part of fostering a world that is kind, that is curious, that listens to understand, a world that is not DE and I inclusive, a world that is genuinely inclusive of the essence of others in pursuit of a world that is socially inclusive, economically inclusive, and a world where humanity once again finds harmony within self, harmony with each other, and harmony with our planet. And a world where we build systems or technology to serve that harmony, to serve those purposes of social inclusivity and economic inclusivity and harmony with planet. And, in Sincerely, what we are doing and getting ready to launch, or are launching, or by the time this shows up, it will likely be launched, is creating community around the human journey, the human transformation journey to wholeness and to service to others in pursuit of a harmonious world, self, others, and planet. So if I describe my essence, and you can feel it, Chip and everyone, I spent on my journey, I spent the better part of 2 to 3 years while I was dealing with mental health, remembering myself as 2 or 3 or 4 years old. And I would love nothing more, Chip, than to work with you at Modern Elder Academy and facilitate some of these workshops where we take people we meditate and we take people back to their 3, 4, 5-year-old, 6-year-old self, and we imagine what we were like at that age before our parents or before the world put us in a box. I spent 3 years thinking about me, and as you can tell, I am deeply curious. I'm a systems thinker, a puzzle builder. I'm deeply loving and emotional and sensitive. And I have a love of humanity because I know what human beings are capable of when we do things from a place of love, not a place of fear. And I'm ultimately a verbal storyteller. So I'm building a storytelling platform, Chip.
Yes, beautiful. We know we need more stories. My last question for you, Katie, is if someone came to you and said, I'd love to understand one truth, one wisdom truth that has Katie's wisdom fingerprints all over it, what would be the bumper sticker of that truth? If it's not already obvious, what would be the origin story of that truth? Because the truth, often our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom and our truth.
Reclaim your essence.
Reclaim your essence. Yeah.
Love your essence.
And you think of the essence as being sort of connected to the soul.
Yeah, and one of the models I've built for Sincerely, I describe us. There's 3 selves. We are made up of 3 selves. And again, if I come to MEA and we do some work together, we'll spend time on this. But there's your lived experience self, which is what this, and I don't use the word patriarchy because I think men and women and anyone in between are on a journey to truth and wholeness. And I think men in this world are experiencing mental health challenges and anxiety with not being whole and complete as much as women are. And I have empathy for both because I've lived both. So what this extractive and performative world that we've built over several thousand years, it values your usefulness, your productivity to society, your lived experience self, what school you went to, what jobs you've done, how, etc. That's one self. Then there's your physical and inherited self, your body, your epigenetics, your lineage. It's in your DNA. And, again, the world we live in values how you look, and it might value your ancestry. But mostly what it values is your lived experience. The third self is your essential self, your essence, which, hey, I believe there's a soul. I have a knowing that there's a soul. Everybody's on their own journey, their own spiritual and life journey. So I don't prescribe spirituality to anyone. Yet it's pretty friggin' hard to deny that baby is born with some unique energy and attributes attached to it that is separate and apart from its body or its experience in the world. And so that's why I said to you earlier, I'm curious, I'm expressive, I'm feminine, I'm a systems thinker. I have masculine and feminine characteristics in my essence. I showed those when I was 6 months old. So 3 selves, the essential self, the physical and inherited self, and the lived experience self. And the reclaiming your essence is the journey. It took me 10 to 15 years. The journey to live in alignment with your essence and those beautiful gifts that you were born with, that the world squeezed out of you, and the things that make you so beautiful and unique as a human being.
It's an honor to have you on the show. We will support your book. We'll support your company. And who knows, we may have you at MEA soon enough as a guest faculty member.
Thank you, Chip. And thank you for this. Thank you for Modern Elder Academy. I didn't cry today, which is amazing for me. My my love and heart goes out to you, Chip, and your own life journey. And you become a friend so quickly. And I love and adore everything you're doing. Helping any human being refine dignity and independence and empowerment in their life is the greatest freaking gift you can give any human being. And you're doing it, Chip. I love and honor you.
Thank you. So Katie was a specialist in restructuring plans. She would go in and help restructure banks. And then she had to restructure her own life. What an irony. First of all, she's just a thoughtful, sweet human. And I do think part of the reason she was so supported was because she built a lot of emotional bank account with people before she gave this big address to tell everybody in her company that she was going to be changing. I think the first lesson I take is just the fact that all of us, probably in some form of our life, have been suppressing a truth. In her case, it sounded like it was when her parents passed, and when in particular her mother passed, that suppression of the truth no longer could stay underneath the surface. And for so many of us, especially in midlife, it is that suppression of the truth that actually shows up in addictive behavior, or in drinking too much, or in being depressed, or in having your midlife crisis and going off the rails. So often it's that truth, the underlying truth, that we need to get reacquainted with, what she calls the essence. So the question I would ask all of you is, what feels suppressed for you? A truth that you wish you could speak out before you actually have to shout it out. Because speaking it out before you have to shout it out is probably healthier for you. In her case, she had it suppressed so long that it did have took a mental toll on her. Secondly, her suggestions of what do you do when you actually have to come out, and it doesn't mean you're coming out and changing gender or affirming your gender. It could be coming out as in a new religion. It could be coming out politically. It could be coming out in terms of a skill set that you've always wanted. There's a woman I always talk about, a lawyer, a litigator, who decided she wanted to be a pastry chef. And, everybody was like, what? So at first people are going to be a little shocked by it. And so she has a suggestion of three steps in this path. The first is vulnerability. And she cited Brené Brown, who is a fan of MEA, and definitely suggest you watch Brené Brown's famous TED Talk. But, vulnerability is the rawest form of authenticity. That's something that Katie said. It's a superpower. And so you start with vulnerability, but you have that vulnerability with number two, a small set of people. Start small and thoughtfully, and do so in a way where you're being honest, but you're also surrounded by love. Because it is that from that core of love that is going to support you as you are making a major transition in your life. It is that core of love that's going to love you into the concentric circles as you go out wider, when people are, frankly, at times are not going to understand it. So you've got to start with the vulnerability, and then with people you love, and then give it time. I think that was a very important piece of this, is that don't expect everything's going to happen overnight. In her case, she needed to take some time. Obviously, she did surgery, and so she had to take time for that. But ultimately, she needed to take some time when she left Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, and before she had her new position as a CEO. And I did love Katie talking about the fact that she wanted to get a position as a woman and be hired as a woman as the CEO. And then finally, I'd say the third thing is just the importance of story. Think of story as a sermon, she said. And it's your own personal sermon, the sermon that helps bring you to wholeness. And how are you, in bringing yourself to wholeness, how then are you in service to humanity? And this really speaks to the idea of what David Brooks writes about quite a bit, the idea of moving from the resume values, which Katie really prized in the first half of her life. First, her adulthood was all about climbing the ladder, to moving from the virtues of your resume to the virtues of your eulogy. the character qualities. What are the qualities that people are going to express at your eulogy? In Katie's case, it'll probably be courage and compassion and equanimity and a sense of humor. So, as you are looking at your own life and you are exploring this idea of your own story, how might your story be less about the resume and more about the eulogy? What are the character qualities you want to be remembered for when you're no longer on this planet? Thank you so much for joining us for this unusual, unique, and lovely story of Katie and her journey to wholeness. See you on the next episode of the Midlife Chrysalis.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.